Hello, and welcome to the Language of Mindfulness podcast. This is a podcast for people who want to have more great conversations in your life. You want to connect, you want to speak authentically, and you want to listen deeply. This is how to do it, and it's the real deal. So why should you listen to the Language of Mindfulness? Because in every episode, I'm going to give you tips and guidance I've learned in my pretty extensive career of coaching and practice from the best and brightest in the field of interpersonal communications, public speaking, meditation, group leadership, and somatic psychology. And we're going to have interviews with some amazing people about their groundbreaking work. It's my goal to give actionable and uncommon tips and advice in every episode that you can implement right away. So subscribe or follow now on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. And if you don't listen, you're going to miss some great stuff that you just won't hear anywhere else. I'm your host, Brett Hill, and welcome to the Language of Mindfulness. I'm really excited to welcome to the podcast Megan Sweet of your3eyes.com. And she's been doing some amazing work on bringing mindfulness and presence and extending the conversation in the educational environment to a much bigger frame than, just kind of, instead of reading, writing arithmetic, it's that, and hey, let's be a person too.
Right.
So I'd like to introduce you to Megan and have her explain. So Megan, what's your mission with your three eyes?
Yeah, that's a great question. And hi, thank you for having me. So my mission with Your Three Eyes
You're
is
welcome.
to actually give permission to educators to take care of themselves. So educators tend to give of themselves quite a bit and burn themselves out and leave the profession. And so my mission is really to give educators permission and tools to take care of themselves so that they can do the transformation they need in their school communities. And I provide both, but I think the new idea for educators is this idea of actually taking care of themselves and putting themselves first. So I like to focus on that part. And then once they're a little bit more grounded, we can do all the planning that's needed around any kind of school change, because that's my professional expertise.
So going into the school, so starting at the layer of, hey, you have to have enough resilience in your life just personally in order to show up in a way that's going to make the changes that need to happen. Exactly. Did I summarize that correctly? Yeah, that's a great summary. And then looking at institutionally, like how can we implement this, more broadly than like one-on-one.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So how does that work? Like you get somebody in and they're burned out teacher. They've been burning the candle at both ends and they're going, oh man, I need help. Like where do you start with that?
Well, I start with a mindfulness practice. So I think it really starts with helping folks to connect back in with themselves again and to truly give themselves permission to stop and take care of themselves. So I usually start with a very simple, let's just take 3 breaths together and see how that feels. And I usually ease educators in with truly very simple on the spot practices that they can do while they're teaching, while they're doing their jobs that they love. Educators have a really hard time, for the most part, understanding that their needs are important. So in addition to those strategies, I also talk with them a lot about actually why mindfulness and why self-care is going to help them be better and do better at their jobs. And there's lots of science behind that too. So I love to talk about that with them so they can understand that actually not only is taking care of themselves going to be beneficial to them individually, but it's going to help their students. And that usually helps them to relax and be willing to try something new on.
Yeah, but you're starting really simply. That's amazing. You're starting really simply with hey, let's just take a break for 3 minutes. And just, I so resonate with that. And in the work that I do, it's sort of like just getting people to turn inward and focus on what's my experience like right now. And when people are so compressed, there's just a lot of benefit to just, not doing anything other than let's just create a space for some decompression.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And what happens then next? So what's the next phase of that? So okay, so you create a little space. They sign up to, oh yeah, I can see how this would be better. Then what do you move into skill training or a deepening process, or
Yeah,
what's
it's a
what's?
great question. Well, I actually support them to do what I call self work and schoolwork and do it at the same time. So the three
Mm,
I's, which maybe helps for me to explain that, really involves three different lenses through which we can see ourselves and our experiences. So I train them in those. The first stands for intellect, and that's really what we do all the time. Is the prefrontal cortex. It's what we as humans especially like to spend a lot of time doing, thinking about the past or the present. So I explained that to them, but then I also introduced two other lenses that are really helpful for them to be able to be more grounded in themselves, but also in their schools. The second lens is insight, which really means perspective taking. So, just as you named, stopping and
mm,
pausing and seeing what's happening internally. So, it can be taking insight on how you're feeling at any given moment, what's happening in your body or in your mind at any given moment, but also reflecting over time. So, what are some patterns that you
mm,
might have? What are some experiences that might be contributing to how you're feeling right now? Help you connect whatever's happening in your internal, immediate moment with what has maybe happened in your past. And the third one is intuition, which really are mindfulness practices, but it's learning to slow down and get out of
mm-hmm,
that prefrontal cortex and that busy thinking and slow down enough to be able to hear like what your intuition is telling you, right? So that it's always there for all of us. And it's just much more
mm-hmm,
subtle and soft and quiet, and you need to slow down enough to be able to hear it. So I support them on how to develop each of those lenses a little bit more and then how to put them together and do the self work first. And when you do the self work first, what it
mm-hmm,
supports you to do is to be self aware, for you to know yourself and to start committing to building and deepening yourself and your own self development. When you do that, then you're ready to do the school work, which I also train them on, which is usually wanting to change something in their classroom or in their school. And that's much more of the intellectually
mm-hmm.
based stuff. But if you don't have a good grounding in yourself, you're not able to look at yourself and your own patterns, it's unlikely you're going to be really effective in any kind of changes you want to make. So, yeah.
Right. So doing all of that work lays the foundation for you to be able to make effective process decisions about how do I implement
Hmm.
ABC and getting something moving forward. How do I make these changes? If you're all like out of whack and stressed, you're not going to be able to prioritize effectively or implement things under
Hmm.
stress. So you can be much more effective, is what I hear you
Yeah,
saying.
Dr. Kristen Neff studies mindful self-compassion, which I don't know if you've heard about mindful self-compassion, but it's mindfulness plus self-compassionate lens. And she has the
Mm-hmm.
same cycle as mine. And she likens it to a yin yang, which can be helpful too. So the yin side is what I call the self care or the self nurturing side. So you do that, you take care of yourself so that you're able to take care of the world or act on the world in a different way, which is the yang side. And the more
Mm-hmm.
you act in the world, the more you need to connect back in with yourself again to ready yourself to go back out into the world again. So it's kind of a cycle, but it requires both sides. You can't always just be giving
Mm-hmm.
and being contributing to your school or your classroom and not ever giving back to yourself. So you need to have both of those sides together so that you can actually do it the most effectively. So it yin yang could be a helpful way to thinking about it too.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, how long have you been involved in this kind of work?
I've been an educator for 27 years, and I have had a mindfulness practice actually since I was a child. So I think for me, I always was that kind of a teacher or that kind of an educator. So
Hmm.
I always struggled with how it was that some educators were strong with classroom management or connecting with kids, and some weren't. And I actually think it connects back to this mindfulness piece and the self-awareness
Oh,
piece.
so could you say a little bit more about that? Like, what would be the distinct? Because I know for a lot of educators out there, some of them listening, and other people, because there's a lot of ways this kind of thing applies to not just educators, but team management and in business as well. It's kind of like what do you notice are the key distinctions there in terms of those who manage those classrooms well versus those who struggle?
Yeah. I think a term that's fairly popular these days, which is a helpful way of thinking about it, is emotional intelligence and resilience, right? So, and I think mindfulness helps you with both of those things.
Hmm.
Emotional intelligence simply is just knowing your own emotions and your needs and feelings, and being able to, as you practice more with that, being able to have some control over them. So rather than just reacting to everything that's happening in your world and your experience, and not even knowing why you're mad or upset or happy or whatever.
Yeah.
When you develop your emotional intelligence, you start to understand what are those triggers for you, what are the things that bring you joy, what are the places where you're going to feel stressed. So that just is helpful in and of itself. And then when you start to regulate that or manage that, it helps you then to be able to make different, wiser, and more supportive decisions. When you put that into a
Hmm.
classroom, it's really important because we're all mammals, so we're part of the mammalian nervous system. And the mammalian nervous system we all have what are called mirror neurons, which basically means that
Hmm.
we instinctively, not intentionally, we don't like turn on a switch when we come into a room, but we instinctively monitor and respond to and reflect back the energy of the folks that we're around, especially if we're in
Hmm.
a position where we're in a subordinate position. So for teachers, if they're in a bad mood, if they're coming to the classroom feeling angry or upset or triggered in some way, even if they don't say that to their kids, that energy is being read by their students, and their students are picking up on it, and they're reacting however they react to that kind of a threat or that kind of an energy. Could be positive too. So if a teacher's coming in and they're really grounded and happy, the kids can train onto that as well, and it helps them to calm down and regulate and be more attentive in class. But if the teacher's angry or the teacher's having, a bad day, which all of us have, the kids will pick up on that, and then they'll start to respond. So it's just really important for us as educators to know that our nervous systems, the way that we're responding to the world, has a direct impact on our students, not only in terms of behavior, but also in terms of learning. So when a teacher is stressed out and kids react to that, the fight, flight, freeze response gets kicked on, and actually their ability to learn, that prefrontal cortex I was talking about, shuts off. So that's a problem.
Yeah. So I hear you saying that, by being aware of your own state, you can influence your capacity to well, you're basically owning your influence,
Mm-hmm.
to improve the availability of your students or your teammates in such a way that they can participate in a learning experience or a team experience more effectively than if you're just completely unaware of, you're coming into the room all wired and messed up, and then suddenly you're not, your team activity, your class activity turns into chaos. It's just a reflection of your inner
Mm-hmm.
world in that case.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah, I took a training in a class called Loving Presence with a man called Ron Kurtz, who created the Hakomi method of somatic psychotherapy. And he had a lesson which I kind of always stuck with me. He would say, he talked about something similar, and the analogy he gave was like, well, if you take an ant, if you look at ants, and you can find, and you take an ant and you kind of like, and you start to look at it, and you find that, and they were doing this, they noticed that with these ants, they're not very, like, they don't move very much, and they're looking at the ants and well, this ants just barely moving around at all. It hardly has. So how does a hive ever get created when these ants are just barely even moving? And then they found out, they put like two or three more together, and they got a little more active, and they put like, 100 together, and suddenly it's bursting. And what they found out is that they bump into each other, and when they bump into each other, they transmit a phenerome, like a scent thing that seems to like activate them into doing something more along the thing that a hive would need to do. And individually, they don't do much, but collectively, they communicate an entire agenda of, hey, let's build a hive, let's do this,
Mm-hmm.
let's get things happening. And I think that there's something in the animal kingdom as a whole about how we influence each other, and the notion of owning your impact is a really big
Mm-hmm.
step, and a lot of people haven't really thought about that in a serious way, because really it's a big deal to sit down and go, well, how am I impacting other people, and is that the impact I want to be having, is the other part of that question.
Yeah, it's a really great point because it's hard sometimes. It's hard to acknowledge what our impact is on others, and It's hard to face when we make
It
it.
can be hard to
It's
know.
hard to know, and sometimes it's hard to
You know,
own.
like where do you go to get that information? Like in business world, in enterprises, it's not, or even in smaller companies, even it's not too uncommon to have a thing they call a 360
Right.
review, and that would be where have you ever heard of something like
Yeah,
that?
totally. Hmm.
Yeah, so there you're getting feedback from your peers and your upper management and those below you about how you're coming across. How am I being, am I impacting?
Hmm.
And in that case, and so when I was doing a group leadership training with matrix leadership, it was like one of the exercises we had was after we got to know each other for a while, we put a piece of paper on everybody's back, and you walked around the room and you wrote on the piece of paper like one or two things that you felt was true about the other person. And this was not walking in cold. This was after spending hours and hours and hours with people for a few days. And so, and the thing is, it's like after you've got like 20 people giving you some piece of information about how they see you, you take it off and you look at it and you go, oh, this is pretty reasonably objective in the sense that, there's no agenda going on here. It's anonymous. And the thing is, it's like if 10 people tell you that you're argumentative and confrontational, that's a
Hmm.
clue
Hmm.
about how you're coming
Yeah.
across. And is that the way you want to be coming across is really the key thing. I feel like I'm talking too much
No, I
here.
think that's such a
So
great point.
I do have a question I want to ask, like, how did you get involved in all this? Like you said, I'm curious because you said you were studying to be mindful when you were a child. So what's that all about?
Well, I grew up in Berkeley in the 70s, and they like to experiment with things. So I would say that's probably how that came about.
Oh,
But how did I get involved with it older? I think mindfulness is one of those things that I didn't always see the connection to my regular life. I allowed things to get very busy, as we all do, and I allowed my practice to fall away. So I definitely had um, a practice for a long time that was very episodic. So I'd be fine, everything was good, and then suddenly things would get hard as life does. And then I'd dive back into mindfulness. And once I felt better again, then I would
yeah.
leave it. So I definitely used it as like a coping strategy, but rather and less so than like an embodied life way of being. But I started integrating it in because I have a long career in education, and my specialty is creating change in educational settings. And those changes are often can be
Mm.
experienced, and change is always felt as somewhat threatening to all of us, right? Even a small change can feel threatening. Um,
Yeah, yeah, of course.
and I often am involved in big changes like closing schools or opening schools or changing like big stuff.
Mm.
And what I found was
Wow.
I was getting really burned out from how I was connecting with my peers at work because everyone was stressed out. And so we were all kind of like nipping at each other a little bit, but also just feeling really challenged with how to continue to be in a position where I was taking that much, you know, kind of being exposed to that much energy, positive or negative, and how to cope with it better.
Mm-hmm.
So I started integrating mindfulness practices into my day because I was like, well, it can't hurt. So let me try it out and see if this helps me feel better. And it really did. Kind of maybe to what you named at the beginning, but
Mm.
my thing was like, I knew at first went to, well, I want everyone to sit and do a minute of mindfulness before we start a meeting, and I want to do that before I host meetings with large school communities, and that's where my mind went first. And then I immediately went to like, well, I can't force people to do that, and that's going to probably create a lot of drama. And I can't, that's my agenda I'm putting on other people, so I can't do that. So then I was like, well, what can I do? Well, I can practice. So I just started practicing and seeing what would
Mm-hmm.
happen. And, I did a few very, basic mindfulness practices, 3 breaths, when I would come in the room, just remind myself, how am I feeling? What's my goal for this meeting or this moment?
Mm-hmm.
And, just connecting back in with my body again. I also just started just being really aware of how I was being around other people and put a real effort in being as positive and
Mm-hmm.
affirming as possible. And the more I did that, the
Mm.
more the environment around me changed without me having to do anything else. So, the more I was aware and I was grounded and I was positive, then the relationship and the interactions with me was better. And I found that I could have help to create more positive meetings and more positive spaces wherever I was. Um,
I
yeah.
love that so
So
much.
that made me hooked.
That's amazing. Yeah. I mean, you're really landing on the heart of what I call the language of mindfulness. It's like by speaking from this more mindful place, it changed the conversation, and that conversation allowed you to be better, allowed the relationships to
Mhm.
be better, it allowed you to get more work done, and everybody to be happier. And all you had to do was change who you were.
Right, small.
Right?
But it's
Small.
embodiment, right? So this is what I share with the teachers. It's not about teaching mindfulness to kids, although we could do that, and that's great, but it's much more around embodying mindfulness practices or being mindful during the day, whatever it is that we're
Yeah.
doing. And the more we embody that, and really, again, that's just being present, as you know, to whatever is here, not, being in the future or in the past, but being a present to what's here and noticing what's here, that changes everything. And it's a practice. So being
Hmm.
embodied is a practice. I spend plenty of my day off somewhere else, not in the current time and space. But the more I become aware of it, I bring myself back to the present moment, and it just helps a lot. It helps all over the place, as
Hmm.
I'm sure you know. But yeah,
That's amazing. So how embodied are you right now?
right now, I'd say I'm 80% embodied right now. So I've got some sensors out to some things. I mean, they're in my present moment. But I think I'm
Hmm.
mostly right here, right now, and I'm enjoying this conversation, and that's always really
Me
helpful.
too.
And yeah, and I have like 20% of like what's coming next. So I will admit I have a little bit of my head. I'm
Ah.
like, okay, I have to pivot. But that's the way it is. And then I just
Mm.
bring myself back here, and away we go.
Right. It's that going out and
Hmm.
coming back, coming back. It's like the coming back is what I try to tell people all the time. It's really that moment where you come back. That's really the leverage moment. That's the mindful moment. It's so beautiful.
Yeah.
Um, so what's next for you? What are you planning on doing with just doing more of the same? Are you have any plans with your project?
I have some talks coming up, so that's really exciting, and I'll be able to post them if folks want to follow me or find out more about mindfulness and education. Going to the website's a great place to go. So www.your, the number three, EYES.com. I am teaching a mindfulness retreat for educators at the end of the month of June, which is all around just, again, exactly what we talked about, embodied mindfulness that you can do during your day.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have some workshops for educators over the summer. This has been a heck of a year, as you know. And
Yes, I can't even
yeah, in
imagine.
classrooms and in schools, it's been really challenging. And the gift of this moment is that there's a realization that attending to our well-being, our social emotional well-being, integrated mindfulness, and other kinds of practices like this into the school day is important for adults and kids alike. And
Mm-hmm.
and there's actually some funding for it. So in some states, on a national level, they're providing some funding. I live in California. There's a ton of funding going just for that. So I'm providing some
Is that
workshops for
right?
educators this summer on how to use that funding, so they can do it the most effectively. And just so, again, demystifying some of what we've been talking about here, but also just how to do that planning stuff, that the yang side that we talked about,
Mm-hmm.
at their
Mm-hmm.
school.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I'm up to this summer.
So if you had to give somebody a tip on like what I mean, oh, here's the question I wanted to ask. Can you tell me like a time when you noted that your mindfulness skill and your capacity really made a difference in either a project or a relationship or a conversation? Like, is there a moment where you go, "Oh my, that would have gone really different had I not been able to be more mindful"?
Yeah. I'm a single mom and I have a 12-year-old son. And so I feel like I'm given regular opportunities with him. But even just yesterday, he was having a day, and it 12-year-olds, these moments happen all the time. And we were decorating a cake, which felt
Sure.
like a simple and fairly easy and enjoyable task, but he was having a hard time. And, I noticed my inner landscape as that was happening. And there was some frustration and there was some concern and there was some like just confusion. I'm like, why is all of this coming out now over this task that we've done dozens of
Yeah.
times?
Mm-hmm.
And so I noted all of those things and I gave myself a little bit of a space. And I breathed a little bit. And I was able to get curious about what was going on for him rather than reacting to, with frustration or some of the other things that were also there. Like, I'm like, it's just a cake, like, move on. Like, that was where my mind was going. But I knew that it was more than just a cake. It wasn't just a cake for whatever was happening to him. There was something
Yes,
else there.
exactly. Something was going on behind the scenes driving all
Exactly.
this tension.
So I was just able to calm down enough and give myself enough space and have that clarity to ask him what was going on and connect back in with him. And it led to a really, beautiful conversation. And he was able to share that actually it was a mountain of things that culminated with the cake, right? That suddenly we were able to unpack. And that's what it is, right? It's not magical. It's just
beautiful.
It's just having that perspective and a little bit more space.
Well, and enough space to not be reactive yourself, and instead enough space for what I would call it, like organic curiosity to arise. Well, what's really going on here? And then enough skill to actually pose the question. That's a lot of skill, and I think it's hard to teach, but it's beautiful to learn. And like you say, it's not rocket science. It's just learning to doing in the work that you've been doing for your life, to kind of notice, breathe, relax, see, look here, what is going on, inquire, and then hold space for the relationship. That's a lot of talent. So thank you for doing that hard work. I really appreciate it. And on behalf of your son, thank you.
I'll record you for the times when he doesn't like what I decide.
That's right. I have a guy who's going to thank me on your behalf. So
cool.
Thank you by proxy. I think it's somebody, thankyoubyproxy.com.
There you
go. Well, it's been so fun talking to you, and I'm so happy that you're doing this work, because it's so crucial and critical, not only for the educators, but for the students who benefit from more grounded, more embodied educators on the planet. And of course, those waters lift, those rising tides lift all boats. And so thank you so much for coming and sharing your journey and your mission. Is there anything you would like to say to people, like if they were interested in learning to be mindful, like what would be like a tip that you could give them to help them on their way? Yeah,
I would say don't make it complicated. Just start doing things that you love and that bring you joy. That's it. Just start there. Just
beautiful. That's master level advice there. Thank you so much once again, and I really appreciate it.
Have a good day.
So that's a wrap on today's edition of the Language of Mindfulness podcast. We hope you've enjoyed it. If so, please leave us a review on iTunes and follow along on whatever podcast platform you're listening on. We'd really appreciate it. And check us out at languageofmindfulness.com, where you can sign up for a free coaching session or download our PDF on 8 ways to be more mindful in a virtual meeting at languageofmindfulness.com/8 ways. Thanks a ton, and we're looking forward to a lot of great new content coming up as well. Have a great one and stay present. Thanks.